Kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. Mark Twain. Hi everyone. The first chapter of the third unit in the 10th Standard English Reader is a story about kindness and thoughtfulness. The story is titled The Best Investment I Ever Made, and it is written by A.J. Cronin, who was a Scottish novelist and physician. A physician is a doctor. The story is about how the author's act of kindness changed a man's life. The writer, A.J. Cronin, begins the story by telling us about one of his return trips from New York on a ship. It was the second day of the ship's journey out from New York. Our author, Dr. A.J. Cronin, was walking around the promenade deck of the ship when he became aware of a passenger watching him closely. A promenade is a public place for walking. Each time the doctor passed by, the passenger followed him with his eyes. The doctor decided not to pay any attention to this man because he wanted to take rest and he wanted to avoid the boredom of meeting and talking to irritating fellow passengers on the ship. Even though the doctor thought that the man who was watching him closely was an irritating man, he didn't look so. In fact, the man looked just the opposite of what the doctor thought him to be. He had a lack of confidence about him. He was a man in his early 40s, short in height, with a fair complexion and clear blue eyes. He had thin hair which had started to stop growing at the front of his head. In other words, he was a man who was turning to be bold. The dark-colored set of clothes that he was wearing, his plain tie and his rimless spectacles all gave him a serious look. This was all our author Dr. Cronin could observe about the man on that day because it was time for dinner on the ship and the doctor had to go down to have his dinner. On the following day, the doctor again observed his fellow voyager. A voyager is a person who travels, especially by ship. The man was again watching the doctor very seriously, sitting on his deck chair. But this time, someone else was with him. Who was it? It was a lady, who looked like the man's wife. Even though the doctor was not at all interested in getting to know this man the previous day, this day he was very intrigued or interested to know about this man. He talked to the ship's steward about this man and the lady and came to know that they were Mr. and Mrs. John from a small suburb of London. A ship's steward is an officer who is in charge of making dining arrangements and provisions. Suburb is a residential area located on the outskirts of a city or large town. So just like the previous day, this day too passed without event. The doctor began to feel sure that Mr. John would remain too shy to fulfill his desire to come and talk to him. The man badly wanted to talk to the doctor, but he was too shy to do it. However, on their final evening at sea, Mrs. John, Mr. John's wife, forced her husband to go and talk to the doctor. "Excuse me, doctor, I wonder if I might introduce myself." He said this almost breathlessly, giving the doctor his visiting card at the same time. He looked at the doctor's face to see if his name on the visiting card would mean anything to the doctor, but when he understood that it didn't, he continued in the same manner. "If you could spare a few minutes, my wife and I would like to have a word with you." The doctor decided to give them his time and sat on the empty chair by their side to listen to the man and his wife. The man, Mr. John, told the doctor that that had been their first visit to America. It was not completely a holiday trip. They had been making a tour of New England states, inspecting many of the summer recreational camps there. The name New England refers to 6 states in the United States of America. After visiting summer recreational camps for young people, the couple, Mr. and Mrs. John, had visited settlement houses. A settlement house is an institution providing various community services, usually to the urban poor. The couple had visited settlement houses to study the methods employed in dealing with cases of backward, maladjusted, and delinquent young people. Maladjusted means having mental and emotional problems that lead to unacceptable behavior. The word delinquent means showing a tendency to commit crimes. As Mr. John was speaking about the reason of their visit to America, the doctor found him liking him very much. The doctor asked more questions to know about the couple and understood that Mr. John and his wife had been active in the field of youth welfare for the past 15 years. Mr. John was by profession a solicitor. A solicitor is a lawyer. Even though he was a lawyer or advocate, Mr. John found time to be the director of an organization that cared for the boys and girls from city slums. As Mr. John spoke with real feeling, Dr. A.J. Cronin got a clear picture of the work these two people were doing. He learned how Mr. and Mrs. John took derelict adolescents. Derelict adolescents are teenagers who are abandoned or forsaken and are in a bad condition. So our doctor came to know how these people, Mr. and Mrs. John, took derelict adolescents from juvenile courts, placed them in healthy environment, healed them in mind and body, and sent them back into the world. These teenagers were taught some useful handicraft that would help them live as good citizens. The work that Mr. and Mrs. John was doing was truly a work of redemption that moved the doctor's heart, and he asked Mr. John what had directed his life into doing this kind of work. It was when the doctor asked this question that Mr. John understood that the doctor still didn't remember him. He exclaimed, "You still do not remember me?" The doctor shook his head. As far as the doctor was concerned, he had never in his life seen this man before. Mr. John then told the doctor that he had wanted to get in touch with the doctor for so many years, but he couldn't find the courage to do so. Having said this, he bent near and spoke a few words into the doctor's ear. At that, slowly, the recognition of who the man was dawned on the doctor. Or in other words, Dr. A.J. Cronin understood who the man was and where he had seen him before. The only occasion the doctor had seen this man before was 25 years ago. His memory sped back to the incident that happened 25 years ago. 25 years ago, Dr. A.J. Cronin was a young doctor and had just begun his practice in a working-class district of London. As he was living and working in London, once, on a foggy November night, around 1 o'clock, the doctor was awakened from his sleep by a loud knocking sound on the door. The doctor quickly put on some clothes and went downstairs to find a sergeant of police standing outside. He had come to call the doctor to attend to a suicide case just around the corner. The police officer and the doctor walked the short distance in the fog and silence and reached the entrance of an old building. As they climbed the old staircase, the doctor's nostrils caught the sick, sweet smell of illuminating gas. When they reached the upper room, the anxious and nervous landlady showed them to a little attic where, on a narrow bed, lay the body of a young man. Attic is a room or space just below the roof of a house. On first look, the young man on the bed looked lifeless. But there was a very, very small chance of bringing him back to life. He was not dead yet. With the police officer's help, the doctor started the work of resuscitation. Resuscitation is an emergency procedure done to bring back someone to consciousness. For 1 full hour, the doctor and the sergeant worked hard to bring the unconscious man back to consciousness, but to no avail. In spite of the great effort and energy they put in, the situation appeared useless. Then, as they were about to give up and accept defeat, the patient gave a shallow but sudden gasp. After half an hour more of redoubled efforts, the young man sat up and gazed at the doctor and the sergeant. At first, it seemed he didn't understand what was going on around him, but slowly he seemed to realize his situation. As he got back his strength, the young man told the doctor, the sergeant, and the landlady his story. His parents were dead. An uncle had found him a job as clerk in a London lawyer's office. Completely friendless, he had fallen into a bad company, He wished to enjoy the pleasures of life that were beyond his means and soon started betting on horses. Very soon he lost whatever small savings he had and pledged his belongings and owed the bookmaker a huge amount of money. In an effort to get back the amount of money he had lost, he took a sum of money from the office safe for a final gamble that he was sure to win. But his last hope failed, and terrified of what might happen if someone found out that he had stolen the money, he had decided to end his life by turning on the gas. When the young man completed narrating his story, there was a long silence in the attic. Then, very roughly, the sergeant asked how much money he had stolen. £7, 10 shillings. His answer sounded pitiful. The doctor, the sergeant, and the landlady couldn't believe that the young man had almost thrown away his life for such a paltry sum. Paltry means too small. The three of them, the sergeant, the landlady, and the doctor, as the only witnesses of the near tragedy, decided to give the young man a fresh start. The sergeant decided to make no report of the case, even though it involved risking his job. The landlady offered a month's free stay until the young man was in a position to pay the rent. The doctor felt that he, out of the three, made the least contribution. He gave the young man the £7 and 10 shillings to put back in the office safe. As the doctor's memories returned from 25 years ago to the present, the ship was moving through the still darkness of the night. There was absolutely no need for words there. Mrs. John lovingly took her husband's hand in her hand. As they all sat in silence, the doctor could not help but think that it was the best investment he had ever made in his life. Investment is the action or process of investing money for profit. Saving Mr. John's life 25 years ago had brought the doctor no material benefits, but had turned hugely profitable. That one man the doctor had saved years ago was now saving thousands of young people's lives. What more could the doctor ask for? He felt that this one investment he had made in his life compensated for all the bad investments he had made throughout his life to make more money, which had produced only anxiety and disappointment. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a few lines from a song written by Henry Burton. Have you had a kindness shown? Pass it on. 'Twas not given for thee alone. Pass it on. Let it travel down the years. Let it wipe another's tears. Till in heaven the deed appears. Pass it on.